Alright guys, I'm going to do a quick refresher video. This is something you should have learned in pre-algebra, but we will talk about it now. It's called SRF, or Simplest Radical Form. And if you kind of break down the three words, it's the simplest form you can put a radical in. And it's not like a, radical dude. It's like a radical, like the square root. A square root sign is called a radical. So the simplest form that you can put a radical in, or the simplest form you can put a square root in. Okay, so like if I have the square root of 9, the simplest form of that is going to be 3. Okay, now because we're doing quadratic unit now, you're going to be doing plus or minus 3. If I had the square root of 81, then the simplest form of square root of 81 is plus or minus 9. Okay, so you kind of get the idea. It's like you take the radical form and you make it as simple as you can. Okay, well now really simplest radical form more applies to, because those are perfect squares, so then you can just take the square root of them and they come out to be whole numbers. Okay, so when you talk about simplest radical form, you're really thinking about ones that don't have a perfect square root. Okay, so you're thinking of things like this one. So like if I did the square root of 24. Okay, now if this is 25, it'd be simple, because it'd just be 5, but it's not. And so 24 doesn't have one number that if you multiply it by itself twice becomes 24. So what we got to do is we're going to break it down into its factors. Okay, when you're looking for its factors, you're actually looking for, hopefully, a factor that is a perfect square. That's your goal. Okay. So let's think about 24 for a second. So 24, if you break that down, you can break that into the square root of 4 times the square root of 6, right? Because 4 times 6 is 24. All right? Now, the cool thing is, when you look at that, okay, you know what the square root of 4 is. Okay, the square root of 4 is 2. So what I like to do to remind myself to bring it outside is I actually like to cross it out. So the square root of 4 is, and I cross it out, and I bring the 2 out because the square root of 4 is 2. Now if you break down the square root of 6, it's 2 and 3. Okay, well neither one of those are perfect squares, so we can't do anything with the 6, so it has to stay inside the square root. So the simplest radical form of 24 is 2 root 6. Okay, and really you should put plus or minus 2 root 6. Okay, so there you go. That's all the simplest radical form is. It's just kind of breaking it down into its factors until you find a perfect square and then taking that part out. Alright, so let's take a look at, say, the square root of 50. Okay, well, the square root of 50, if you break it down, we can break that into the square root of 25 times the square root of 2. Right, because 2 times 25 is 50. Now, what's the square root of 25? Okay, the square root of 25 is 5. And then we still have this root 2 inside of there. And then we will put a little plus and minus in there. There's your answer. Plus or minus 5 root 2. Okay, now the reason we put the plus or minus, remember, is not we're saying plus or minus it. We're saying it's either positive 5 root 2 or it's negative 5 root 2. That's why you put plus or minus at the front. Okay, you could also rewrite it if you wanted to as positive 5 root 2 or negative 5 root 2. Okay, that's what that means. So plus or minus 5 root 2. Positive or negative 5 root 2. Alright, let's do another couple examples here. Alright, so what if we had like, let's do the square root of 64. Okay, now that we know that one's easy, right? That should just be, cross it out, square root of 8. Okay, it's just 8. Positive or negative 8. But I want to actually take this for a second because we already know what the answer is, and I'm going to show you another trick. Okay, actually maybe 64 is a little too big. Well, I'm going to change that. Let's do, instead of 64, let's do the square root of 32, because it's going to be a little easier this way. Alright, so you break down 32, and what I want to do this time is I'm only going to break it down by 2's. So pretend for a second that all I knew was that this was an even number, and I only knew I could break it down by 2. So 2 goes into it. 2 times 16 is 32. Okay? Well, let's pretend we didn't know the square root of 16 was. So we're going to break down 16 as well into 2 times 8. Okay? And then we're going to break down the 8 into 2 times 4, and then the 4 into 2 times 2. Okay? Now, here's your little trick. For every pair that you have, okay, so if you look here, we have one pair of root 2's. Okay, well, if you multiply those two back together, root 2 times root 2 is going to give you square root of 4, right? And the square root of 4 is 2. Okay, well, the trick is whenever you have a pair like you do here, okay, we have this pair here, root 2 and root 2, whenever you have a pair like that, instead of having to multiply them back together and then take the square root, all you do is you take the number that's inside of it and you just bring one of them out. That's it. So we got a root, so we have a 2 there. We've got another pair right here, so root 2 times root 2 is just going to give us another 2. So on the outside now, and then the other one doesn't have a pair. So on the outside now we have 2 and another 2, and then we have root 2 on the end. Okay? So 2 times 2 is 4. Let me shrink this up just a second. 2 times 2 is 4, and then we have the root 2 left. Alright, so if you ever have a number that's too big and you can't really break it down, that's always a trick for you to break it down. You can just break it down by whatever you can, and then ultimately you just look for pairs, and then once you have a pair, you pull out the number. Okay? Let me think of another one. How about 256 might come out pretty even. Let's do 64. Okay, so we'll do this one with 2's. So root 2 times root 32, root 2 times root 16, root 2 times root 8, root 2 times root 4, and I need to shrink this up a bit, and root 2 times root 2. Okay, so what pairs do I have? Got a pair there, so that'll make a 2. I have a pair there, that'll make a 2. And a pair there, that'll make a 2. So I have 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. And the square root of 64 is 8. So there we go. Don't forget your plus and minus, right? Alright, so hopefully that kind of cleared up some of the confusion with you guys for taking the simplest radical form.